out with a hard question, which is I think clearly the burning issue that's on top of everybody's mind is what was Kamala Harris like at grade school?
She was smart on crime. That is actually my claim to fame. I went to kindergarten through third grade, the first fully integrated class in the Berkeley Unified School District. I was born in 1964, and Kamala and I met in 1969 in kindergarten, and I will show you after, but when Biden nominated her to be her running mate, my mother dragged out all of the class pictures, first, second, third grade, and you can figure out which one is me and which one is Kamala. But we grew up in a remarkably diverse, integrated K through 12 environment, and it, I think, informed who she became and who I became.
Now, your eventual declaration for mayor was a waiting for Godot-like experience, though in this case Godot did eventually arrive, and San Francisco is a bit more vibrant than a bleak, desolate road with a single tree. Please explain to us why at long last you did arrive.
You ask questions the way you write articles, Joe. Which I have to say is always a pleasure. It is a pleasure to read you. You are the bard that keeps San Francisco accountable. It was a tough decision. I've done this for a long time. I have a family and a loving spouse, and we love to travel. Thank you for being here, Nancy, and supporting me in this. I think that San Francisco is at a crossroads, and at a certain point, I decided that retirement was not an option, and going back to buying water rights for Indian tribes in Nevada was, it's important, but was not as important as the future of the city that we love.
Decades ago, whenever your name came up to run for mayor, I believe you yourself said that you were not a citywide candidate, which is not what you would say now. So what has changed?
Well, I want to thank the good people of District 3 who are in this room, the northeast corner of San Francisco, which includes Chinatown and North Beach and the northern waterfront and Russian and Knob and Telegraph Hills and the upper Tenderloin and Polk Gulch, who have seen fit to elect me 5 times. And that's given me a lot of experience. I've learned, when I first ran for office, I didn't know anything about water delivery policy. I didn't know anything about, all I knew about was tenant landlord. That I kind of ran on that. And I have been steeped in all sorts of policy, and in that 17 of the last 24 years, I did a Jerry Brown. For those of you who do not know, I served 2 consecutive terms, which is what our Constitution, the Charter allows, and then never intended to run again, and 7 years later, in some weird circumstances, ran again, and that was 9 years ago. So 17 of the last 24 years, 3 times I've been elected board president, and that has actually put me in a position to not just be a district supervisor, but to be a citywide supervisor and make citywide policy. And it takes me to the Excelsior, and it takes me to the Park Side, and it takes me to the OMI. And so I guess in those 24 years, I've become viable as a citywide candidate.
Is it because of how you have changed, or because of how the city has changed?
That's a good question, Joe. I guess maybe I would retort with a different kind of question, which is what has happened to San Francisco that this kind of candidacy was lacking? And what happened that that the top candidates in this race were very similar, had very similar ideological perspectives? That wasn't the case historically in the days of Art Agnos. That was not the case in the days that Tom Amiano challenged his lordship Willie Lewis Brown, but has been the case lately. So I guess the city has changed, and I think we're all aware. I'm used to lopsided elections. I'm used to being outspent 3-1 or 4-1, but that landscape has changed as a handful of extremely wealthy special interests have invested now untold sums into local elections. So I think that's changed the landscape.
Would you have run if there was a suitable candidate, or did you just think this isn't good enough?
Listen, I struggled with this for a year. There were people in this room who would yell at me on the street and tell me to run, and it was not. I would much rather go live my next 10 years doing what Nancy and I love, which is backpacking and floating a boat down a river. But there was nobody else who rose to the occasion. That's the answer.
So, Aaron Peskin, what is a progressive and are you one?
You know, I have to say, who here reads Heather Cox Richardson? If you don't read Heather Cox Richardson, try to read Heather Cox Richardson. She is absolutely brilliant, and she is a historian who is evoking the New Deal and evoking the promise that America grappled with, that brought us Medicare and brought us Social Security, the safety net that San Francisco has always stood for, that has been under attack in the state of California since the days of Governor Reagan, in the federal government now for many, many administrations. Biden has reversed much of that, but that is what I call progressive values, and those values have been wanting in San Francisco. There is a new hegemonic thinking in San Francisco that government is not there to take care of the most vulnerable. I think those are progressive values. I also think public safety is a progressive value. I think that being fiscally prudent is a progressive value. When I started out 24 years ago, San Francisco had some of the most anemic fiscal reserves of any major American city. And interestingly enough, it was the so-called progressives on the Board of Supervisors that insisted that we have rainy day funds so that we could have superlative bond ratings, so that we could borrow money for our general works, whether it's rebuilding San Francisco General Hospital or paving our streets. I think those are progressive values too. But being a mayor, a lot of it transcends political ideology. I mean, there are no moderate or progressive potholes. They're just potholes, and our job is to fill them efficiently and get the job done and make the city that knows how to work again.
Yeah. So the moderate and progressive potholes line is a good one, but I'm wondering in 2024 if it's still true. Do you not feel that there is a disturbing tendency now that if a progressive says there's a pothole, the moderate says no, there isn't?
Listen, Joe, the level of silliness and acrimony hasn't been healthy for any of us, and I think that some of the behavior at the national level has precipitated down to local politics, and it's not healthy, it's not constructive, and quite frankly, when we collaborate and we bring people together, whether it's my colleagues on the Board of Supervisors, the board, and the mayor, we actually get things done. I mean, I've been able to work with this mayor to get things done. It's sometimes the exception to the rule, but I think it is incumbent on all of us, if we want to heal the city, to put that divisive rhetoric aside and fill those potholes.
For whatever reason, your campaign signs don't say we want Aaron, or even we like Aaron, but they say we need Aaron. I was hoping you could explain why in a time of scarcity we need the progressive Aaron Peskin as mayor of San Francisco.
So, first of all, let me say that there is a narrative that has been, at some expense, laid across San Francisco that we are consuming, that we don't have a strong mayor system of government. The narrative has been that were it not for the progressives and the liberal Board of Supervisors, I won't even call it a progressive Board of Supervisors, that all of our ills would be solved. Let me tell you, I have, in the 24 years that I have been on and off the Board of Supervisors, never had a progressive mayor. They've all been moderate to arguably conservative mayors in the San Francisco lexicon. And if you actually look what's happening at the national level, having a progressive chief executive who has extraordinary powers, has worked. I mean, look at how many people this government has put to work. Look at actually, and even though the federal narrative is being lost on many people, the Biden administration has actually done extraordinary things. I think we need a progressive chief executive. And let me just say, we don't have a strong mayor system of government. We have a super strong mayor system of government. And that is objectively true. I mean, if you compare us to the mayoral powers of other major American cities, San Francisco mayors have more power than virtually any other mayor, and I intend to use that power, and I intend to use it collaboratively, and I intend to use it to actually get things done and bring people together.
So let's talk about another applause line, scarcity, which is, how bad is it going to be? How bad is the budget shortfall going to be this year and next year?
Down cycles are not fun, and they're not easy, and the decisions that we are making and are going to have to make are going to be very, very difficult, and they are going to come with real human cost. There is no question about that. When I first got elected and took office on January 8th of 2001, I got the bad news that the dot-com 1.0 bust had just happened. It was a very sharp decline, and we got through that and we bounced back. When I ended my second term as president, the years 2007, 2008, we were in an economic lull that we now call the Great Recession. And at that time, on a budget that is significantly smaller than this budget, we had to preside over cutting $535 million out of what in those days was about a $10 billion budget. We now have to cut $750 million out of a $14.6 billion budget. We are going to get through it. San Francisco is a resilient city. This city burned down 3 times before the 1906 earthquake and fire. We got through COVID. We will recover from COVID. And nobody told us about the 1918 Spanish influenza that killed more people than the 1906 earthquake. But we're going to be just fine.
I suppose burning down the city is what people used to do on a Friday, but what I'm wondering here also is, I was here for the Great Recession as well, and certainly getting here during the 2000-2001 period, but it seems the business model of San Francisco is in danger. I mean, downtown San Francisco looks like an A's game.
Fortunately, San Francisco is not being run by the Fishers.
Very fortunate. What are we going to do about downtown? And what do the city's bean counters say about how much longer it will remain hollow?
So if you look at our 5-year economic forecast, it is not a doom loop. We are certainly experiencing a contraction. The nature of work has profoundly changed. If you think of, when you go back to those uncertain, remarkably frightening days that were the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, the thing that I remark on that is truly so remarkable was that we had this technology that few, if any of us used, and we seamlessly transitioned into this moment where, in my world, we were conducting Board of Supervisors meetings from our bedrooms and our kitchens. The public was able to comment. And guess what? A lot of people now realize that they don't, and this is in many cases good, have to fly to Los Angeles for a meeting, shrinking our carbon footprint, and that they don't have to go to their offices downtown, which is why we have a 36% office vacancy rate. But there is a lot of opportunity in scarcity, Joe, and those opportunities are rethinking a downtown and thinking about the midterm and the long term. San Francisco's downtown, and I say this, that's where I met my wife in the 1980s, was never a place you hung out. After work, we would go to the Castro, or we would go to the Mission, or we would go to North Beach. It was not a 24-hour neighborhood. This is actually an opportunity to turn San Francisco's downtown into a destination neighborhood, and the prices are right to do that. We can inject residential into the downtown core. We can bring arts and culture and a string of neighborhood parks into the downtown core, and I think we should see it as an opportunity.
I think this is part of what you were talking about when you said we're in a once-in-a-generation moment to rethink the size and scope of San Francisco government. What else would we do?
This is a back to basics moment, and there are a lot of wonderful things that the city does that are want-to-haves. And there are a lot of things that the city does that are need-to-haves. Our public health system is a need-to-have. We have got to, if COVID didn't teach us something, it is that having a robust public health system, having our general hospital, having Laguna Honda that we rescued and resuscitated, having our neighborhood clinics is a necessity. We just went through this, the Chronicle covered it. We just went through a little pushing and shoving match, which is resolving itself and has moved from fighting to collaboration, where a general obligation bond that hopefully will end up on the ballot for us all to vote on in November, that, by the way, will not only not raise your property taxes if you are a property owner, will not raise your rents if you are a tenant. Thank you to my colleagues for unanimously approving legislation in the last couple of weeks that limits pass-throughs from general obligation bonds. But this is a moment that we have to make tough decisions. And if I have to choose between something that is very nice, Harvey Milk Plaza, and something that is absolutely necessary, the city clinic that is critical to getting to zero, I would choose the city clinic. And those are the tough decisions that we're going to have to make. And this is going to be a reset moment, Joe, to get to what you're asking, which is San Francisco's government is going to have to make those decisions and contract in some amount. Having said that, our economy has always roared back because this is an incredible city. The rich tapestry of neighborhoods are the envy of the world. And yes, we have some very real challenges and some very real struggles around homelessness, around crime, around people feeling safe, around drug use. But those are things that San Francisco is addressing and are solvable. They are solvable.
Does San Francisco have a public safety crisis?
Well, this is very interesting, and that's why I just said issues of crime and people feeling safe. And it is profoundly important that people feel safe. When I hear stories about people, seniors, who don't want to leave their residences, it doesn't matter how safe the streets actually are. That is unacceptable. And let me say, we've been having this, big kerfluffle about how much we need to expand the police department. We need to fill our 300 fully funded vacant positions in the San Francisco Police Department. We need to actually have enough 911 dispatchers. We also need, on the public health side, those crisis counselors and those nurses, and we've got to fill those positions. And I have to say, San Francisco is still a very, very wealthy city. What we need to do is actually fix our civil service hiring system to fill those positions. If you want talent as a Q2 beat officer, if you want talent as a nurse, a process that takes 12 or 14 or 16 months to get through, those people aren't going to wait around.
You've talked about quote-unquote drug supermarkets, which unfortunately is often the only supermarket in that part of town. What can the city do about chaos, drug use, property crime on the streets? And how do the present administration's efforts stand up?
So let me say that I do believe that we can be compassionate and that we can be firm. And I work in the Tenderloin. I work at City Hall. And in the shadows of City Hall, we had open air drug supermarkets, and people are dying because they shop at those supermarkets. And the fact that literally across the plaza from City Hall this was happening and everybody was turning a blind eye was absolutely unacceptable. I was the first person to say this is a public health crisis and it requires law enforcement. There are different opinions about this, but I actually had the board and the mayor meet in United Nations Plaza because I wanted to have attention brought to that crisis. I asked for us to stand up a drug market coordination center with public health, with law enforcement. That was initially dismissed, I thought that could be stood up in a week or two. It was stood up many months later, and I don't know if any of you go to that neighborhood, but the results are demonstrably good. We can do things when we collaborate. There has been a vast improvement. We still have a long ways to go, but that's what happens when you actually bring people together and you're willing to stop ignoring things.
How much of the activity around narcotics is local and how much is being done by the CHP and others?
The intervention of the California Highway Patrol was limited to, and by the way, as much as I would like San Francisco to be able to do everything by itself, and as much as, and we'll get to public integrity and the corruption scandals, as much as I am embarrassed that we were not able to solve our own corruption, when you need help, and I've learned this in recovery, you gotta ask for it. And so I was okay with the Highway Patrol being there, but let me just tell you, the second APEC was over, they evaporated and we are back on our own again, but we're staying at it.
San Francisco police registered arrest at the lowest rate of any of California's 58 counties, and it's not even close. We have a property crime epidemic going back decades, and a police force that's renowned for not doing follow-up investigations. As a mayor, what could you do about this?
Let me say that we all see the world from where we live, and in the northeast corner of the city, which is Central Station, which many of you, some of you sitting in front of me know well, we have done and insisted on real community policing. And I have to say, the beat officers, particularly in Chinatown, where a quarter of a century ago, I insisted that they be linguistically competent. Many of them grew up in that neighborhood and are patrolling that neighborhood and know the names of the shopkeepers and know the names of the residents and the family associations. And we have the same thing actually in other parts of the district. The promise of community policing that actually happens in the Central District and has long been promised to the rest of the city, it is time to meet that promise for the rest of the city. And I know we can do it because we do it in parts of the city, and I think the police department is ready for that. I want to say this about the SFPD. They did not have to. They could have walked away from the Department of Justice's 272 recommendations, but they actually stuck with it for 8 years, and a couple of weeks ago actually implemented the last of those 272 recommendations. I want to work with the police, and by the way, this is also goes for all things, which is when you treat folks with dignity and respect and hold them accountable and tell them that they're doing a good job, they want to work for you. And so I want that to be a part of this administration.
So if the good people of Together SF get their way, whoever becomes the next mayor will have a greater share of the appointees to the commissions, the ability to terminate the commissioners just like that, and the ability to hire and fire department heads, which leads to the question of who would Mayor Aaron Peskin fire?
I was really excited about talking about the Together SF rewriting of our Constitution, but then you took that sharp turn there, Joe.
We can talk more about
so. Apropos that question, let me say that this city is full of smart people, and the city's working women and men are full of very smart people. And most of our department heads are very, very smart, very experienced people. They need an environment that nurtures that. They need a leader who is going to help them collaborate. Many of the ills that we face are not simply, I mean, maybe if it's the water delivery, it's easy to say, Public Utilities Commission, you gotta get the water from Hetch Hetchy to our faucet. But when you're dealing with illegal vending and you have the Department of Public Works and law enforcement and public health because they deal with hot dog carts, you've got to have people who are brought together and collaborate. And I think that approaching this with the I'm going to rule by fear, and I'm going to fire this one, and I'm going to fire that one, is not the mature environment that I want to foster. I can say this, Joe, which is, if I become mayor, there's certainly going to be a different chief of staff. There's certainly going to be a different mayoral staff. And by the way, the city won't be run by the chief of staff, it will be run by the mayor.
We had Daniel Murray and Mark Farrell and Asha Safai up here, names that came up a lot were Jeffrey Tumble, Bill Scott. These guys, they shouldn't be looking on Craigslist or anything like that?
That's no way to run a company. That's Donald Trump-like behavior. I'm gonna fire this one, I'm gonna fire that one. I want people to be their best. I want people to come to work every day wanting to do their job. Running for mayor and starting to create the politics of fear is not what the city's workforce and not what the city's population need. They need somebody who maturely wants people to be the best they can be. That doesn't mean that I won't make decisions and that people might not be the best fit for a department, but I don't think that's the right way to foster the kind of collaboration and the kind of spirit of coming together that this city needs and deserves.
Well, I'll get off of it after this one, but you would be able to collaborate with Phil Ginsburg?
I will say this about our Recreation and Parks Department, and we do a survey through the Controller's Office every other year about people's satisfaction with various things, muni, street repair, and I will say this, which is Rec and Park scores very, very high. It did not used to be that way. I think people feel very good about their parks. And so as a mayor, you have to acknowledge if things are working well, do you need to make those decisions or not?
I would say the libraries work very well. Yes. The libraries work very well.
I think that the libraries are doing, and by the way, a lot of this is thanks to the voters. I mean, this is a city with very smart people, and it's also a city with very generous people. The fact that we have well-funded libraries when other cities are closing their libraries is really thanks to all of us.
We have a good Department of Elections. We have very nice parks. They do a great job with the Little League and everything else. But
are your kids in Little League, Joe?
Just the one. I was going to ask, you kind of brought this up with, you can't avoid the fact you've been in government a long time. There's so many people in San Francisco that it's kind of like the caretaker of the Overlook Hotel. They've always been here. And most people would say that the government of San Francisco isn't working its best. So how do you convince voters that your experience in government is a benefit and not a detriment?
I would start with this, which is I have never run for any other position. I never used the Board of Supervisors to run for the state assembly or the state senate or Congress. My devotion, my love has been solely and absolutely to the city that we love. And by the way, and I'm not saying this by way of some kind of silly remark, this is not what I intended to do when I grew up. I did this for 8 years. I left this. I was called back. Along the way, I have garnered not only experience, but deep understanding into how each and every department functions, how they work with one another. I think that I can now harness that 25 years of experience as the chief executive of San Francisco in ways that no other candidate for that office has had that level of experience.
How reasonable an excuse is it, as with your experience in government, and people probably not liking government as much as parks or libraries, even though it's part of government, how much of an excuse is it that we have a super mayor system, as you put it? How do you explain to people the abridged nature of the power you've had?
I mean, it's a basic civics lesson, which is that the legislative branch of your local government is not a co-equal branch in San Francisco under our Constitution, the San Francisco Charter. And remember, everybody loves their congresswoman. We love Nancy Pelosi by and large, at least 78% of us on an annual basis or every other year basis. But boy, do we hate the United States Congress. So, I mean, that's the reality of a legislative body. But to answer your question, Joe, the Board of Supervisors, by design, doesn't get to pick up the phone and say, Chief, I think you should deploy more cops than the Tenor ones. As a matter of fact, this mayor called up the chief and said, I want you to take officers from every station and deploy them at Union Square, which resulted in 100,000 hours of overtime that sent a bill to the Board of Supervisors last year in the amount of $27 million, which I voted for because they'd already spent the money and, they had to be paid. But so, I mean, that is the reality. That is, by the way, the charter says that a member of the Board of Supervisors cannot interfere in the workings of the executive branch, punishable by removal from office. So it is, I mean, I can suggest things, but it is technically illegal for me to call up the head of Public Works and say, thou shalt clean up the mess on the corner of Valencia and 16th Street. That is reserved to the executive branch. This is the way our Constitution is written.
This reminds me of reading Talmudic literature about how to, on the Sabbath, suggest that people will do well by putting out the fire in your home without breaking the tenets of ordering someone to work.
Well, this is the Sabbath.
Yeah, it is. So let me ask you this. Are we in a housing crisis?
I believe that we are in an affordable housing crisis. And I actually have, I think, some very real solutions for that. And let's start on the prevention side. The best housing that we have is the housing that we live in. And taking steps to continue to do what San Francisco, I think, has done very well, which is to make sure that people can age in place and don't end up adding to our homeless population, is profoundly important. And that is rent control, that is eviction protections, and I have stood for that from the first day I was elected until this day. And by the way, I believe that, and we're going to have this chance in November, that if the Costa-Hawkins Act, which is the state law that preempts us locally from applying rent control to buildings built after 1979, if the voters of the state of California get rid of that in November, I believe that we should extend rent control to the 40% of renters that are not subject to rent control in San Francisco. Despite what my opponents would like you to believe, I have been pro-housing from the first day that I got into office to this day. I carried the legislation for the rezoning of the eastern neighborhoods. I have voted for the Rincon Hill Plan, the Park Merced, Central Soma, Western Soma, Balboa Park, the Shipyard, Candlestick Point, over 100,000 units of housing. I have also voted for making sure that developers give back with on-site inclusionary housing. And when the economy changed, and this was not a popular decision, I also acknowledged that those numbers should come down, and was the leader of a movement to bring the percentage of inclusionary housing down because it was not economically feasible. I have also, and thank you again, San Francisco, been the champion of now $1.3 billion in affordable housing bonds in the 24 years that I've been on the Board of Supervisors. And I want to thank all of you for passing Proposition A the month before last, which is a huge boon. But look, I also think that, Joe, we can be pro-housing and we can grow this city and be pro-neighborhood and learn from mistakes that we should not repeat. We should not repeat the mistakes that we made during the terrible days of redevelopment when we tore communities asunder and displaced people who still cannot come back to San Francisco. We made mistakes when we built freeways along the Embarcadero and cut San Francisco off from its waterfront and punched a freeway through the center of San Francisco that became a dangerous, scary place. We fixed those mistakes. We learned from the mistakes that other cities made, and we stopped them from happening here by building a wall on the waterfront that started at the Fontana Towers. And we don't want to be the Jersey Shore, at least I don't want to be the Jersey Shore, but I think we have an affordable housing crisis. And finally, let's get out of, again, this imposed, divisive rhetoric that doesn't bring people together, that doesn't move the ball forward. Everybody's talking about, if we got rid of all the laws, everything would be fine. You all know, we've done a lot of that. We've streamlined, we've rezoned, we've added capacity. It's all about financing. It's all about financing and getting our heads around how to actually have capital for investment into affordable housing is the challenge. And to that end, after months and months of work, and I want to salute a whole bunch of people both on the for-profit development side, on the nonprofit development side, and a brilliant staff member in my office, Nate Harrell, who finally figured out, and San Francisco has never done this before, that there are two kinds of tax-exempt bonds, governmental bonds and 501c3 bonds, that the city and county can be the conduit issuer of, that are at much lower interest rates. They don't have to be voted on by us because they are not paid back by our property taxes. The debt is serviced by revenue. And these things actually pencil between 80 and 120% of AMI. That is workforce housing. That is housing for our bus drivers. That is housing for our nurses. That is housing for the people who have been cut out. That is the missing middle housing. And that is actually a vehicle that we can use to provide financing for turning vacant office into residential in our downtown, where there's a lot of opportunity, where there are a lot of smaller property types. I'm thinking about the historic buildings that have operable windows, smaller floor plates. Many of them have very low bases, family trusts. These are not the big REIT glass towers, 40 stories high with 25,000 square foot floor plates. So I think there is a lot of opportunity there. And by the way, our interest rates are not always going to remain this high.
That's a lot to know. All of that, but do you feel that none of your past policies on housing have had negative effects on production and may have unintentionally led to price spikes?
Let me, I'm happy to answer the question, but I would actually like to just flip it just a little bit. I just told you about the forest. I fought a few trees here and there along the way that were square pegs that did not fit into round holes, that were going to gentrify neighborhoods, that were going to displace people, and I have a reputation for that. But that was me listening to communities. Much of it in this neighborhood in the Mission, as well as in the Tenderloin and in Chinatown, neighborhoods that I think we have an outsized responsibility to listen to. But to your question, no, I am very proud of the inclusionary housing policy that San Francisco was at the forefront of, that has been adopted all around the country. I am proud of the fact that those inclusionary percentages went up as the industry made more and more profit. And I was the first person to say, this is no longer economically feasible, and we cut those inclusionary rates almost in half. But no, I think that our policies have worked very well. Listen, it was just a few years ago, Joe, that everywhere you went in San Francisco, there were buildings going up everywhere. What did Ed Lee say? That the bird of San Francisco was the crane. What has changed is that we are slogging through the aftermath of a pandemic, a changed nature of work, and a lack of access to capital, which is not just San Francisco's problem, it's America's problem.
So let me ask one more time. You have probably voted to enable more housing than anybody, but how much of it was in your backyard?
Very good question. No, that's an excellent question. And remember that the northeast corner of the city, we live in the second densest city in America, and the northeast corner of the city that happens to be District 3 is the densest part of this entire city. Our buildings, they all touch. They're mostly multifamily. They are mostly rent controlled prior to 1979. Much of it rebuilt uniformly after the 1906 earthquake. So we have a lot less opportunity sites than there are in other parts of the city. Having said that, going back to the tearing down of the Embarcadero Freeway, thank you, Art Agnos, when we got those parcels of land, and Willie Brown was the mayor and I was a newbie supervisor, he had a hotel plan for one and I forget what for the other, and one of them was going to be affordable housing. I am proud to tell you every single one of those are mid-rise, affordable housing, densely built, now for hundreds and hundreds of people, and there are more of those opportunities in the northeast corner of the city. I would like to turn the Kirkland bus yard at Fisherman's Wharf, which is a remarkable opportunity, into hundreds and hundreds of units of affordable housing.
You made recovery a key point of your campaign. I'm wondering, what have you learned as a non-dependent person, and how is your life different? What has replaced alcohol?
Well, you know, Joe, I think actually one of the things I learned is that I am a dependent person. I mean, recovery is not easy stuff. What I think I realized is how remarkably supported I am by not only my family, but by my entire community. And that I'm dependent on that community. And that I don't need to be dependent on alcohol. And it's been an awakening for me. I wouldn't be here right now if it were not for that. It has given me a whole new sense of how I see things, and it is not corny. I want to bring that sense of recovery to a city that I profoundly think is also in need of recovery.
How do you treat people differently now?
That's a really good question. I am certainly more even-keeled. I certainly get frustrated much less. I find myself, I mean, I'm usually always appropriate, but now I'm almost 100% appropriate, which is not to say that I don't have feelings, but listen, I gotta tell you something. I wake up happy every day. I wake up looking forward to the day. I am just much more joyous every day.
Have you sought people out to talk to them about the way you treated them in the past?
There are people that I have behaved with unprofessionally, who I've apologized to at the time and who I've apologized to since. But I have to tell you that I think I deeply care about San Francisco, and while I've expressed my frustrations in ways that were not professional, that I think even the people who I've apologized to knew that it came from a deep-seated place of wanting to get things done for the city that I profoundly care about.
So I can start going to some of these audience questions, of which we have a number of these that are very good, including this one that says, please describe the style, I believe I'm saying the style of corruption in the city. And it's neoclassical. And please describe the style of corruption in the city and what you will do about it as mayor. Scope? Where is it?
The scope, not the style, the scope of corruption.
That's a better question. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And let me just say, as somebody who has devoted the lion's share of my adult life to public service, there is just absolutely nothing more devastating than when you see the erosion of public trust. I mean, it just makes you sick to your stomach. It is terrible for people's belief in a government. By the way, I note that cheaters cheat in private corporations, cheaters cheat at nonprofits, cheaters cheat in government. But it is absolutely devastating. And it's also embarrassing, not just because it's embarrassing as a public official, but it's also embarrassing, and I referred to this a little bit earlier, when it's been the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the U.S. Attorney who is having to discover this corruption. How come we can't discover it ourselves? I would much rather, I don't want to sweep any of our dirty laundry under the carpet, but I would much rather have our city discover that corruption and prosecute that corruption, for which I am clearly less than zero tolerance. To that end, and I apologize for actually not thinking about this sooner, because I was always told, well, don't worry, the Ethics Commission will take care of it, or the DA will take care of it. And so part of the question is, what is it that the FBI had that we don't have? And so I, again, want to thank Nate Harrell for this. And the answer is, we didn't have the power of, or enough power of subpoena. We did not have any city official who was charged with investigating and rooting out city corruption. And to that end, and I announced this on April the 6th, we have devised a Office of the Inspector General. We went and did a best practices around the United States research project. We looked at what they do in Atlanta, what they do in New York, and I am going to ask all of you in November to amend our charter to create an Office of the Inspector General in the city and county of San Francisco.
Let me ask you though about the atmosphere, and this is part of, you've been here for so long. You and I have talked about this in public before, and you said that you were sorry and you felt bad that this city, and you took your appropriate share of blame for this as well, enabled Mohamed Nuru as a fixer rather than fixing the system. What does that say about San Francisco, that Mohamed Nuru essentially had a economy of scale where he could basically make himself indispensable to fix the things that should have been fixed?
No, Joe is absolutely right. And so just, here's how the world works. You call me, you email me, you tell me that you have tried 311 and nothing has worked. And what do I want to do? I want to clean up that mess on your corner. And so I pick up the phone and say, I don't tell him what to do because that's a violation of the charter, but I suggest that he might want to clean up the pile of, whatever, or abate the graffiti at whatever. And the reality is, Joe is absolutely right, which is, shouldn't take my call. The 311 call or the 311 email or the app should have taken care of it, and that is a system that is broken. What Mohamed did was he made himself invaluable to 11 members of the Board of Supervisors, mayor, and pretty much every other elected official, and would get it done. I would feel good because the person who called me got their pile of junk cleaned up in an hour, but you're absolutely right. It speaks to a broken system, and it speaks to the need to actually fundamentally fix that system and have metrics which are you abating all of the 311 graffiti calls that you've gotten, or does it require me to do it? And that is something that I think a chief executive needs to hold our departments accountable for.
We've got some more good questions here. A audience member says, we have been a small business owner for 35 years. Ristorante Milano. What can you do to help small business?
Well, I'm gonna get in trouble for saying this right now because it's not public yet, but it's about to be public in 1 second. I think small businesses in San Francisco need a whole bunch of tax relief, because if you survive the pandemic in the last 5 years, the city needs to figure out other ways, and to that end, and by the way, this is an instance of collaboration, and it has been a remarkably complex project, for which I salute our former controller, Ben Rosenfield, who stayed on. Actually, earlier today, we put the last touches on this package, and it will be announced on Monday. We are going to vastly increase the business exemption for small businesses in San Francisco to $5 million.
Tweet it out, Eugene. All right. We have another question here from the. We have a question that says,
I'm going to get I guarantee you that when I walk out of here, I'm going to get a call from the mayor's chief of staff saying, "Did you just tell that to 200 people?"
how do you make sure that Prop 1 and Care Court will be established, will be implemented with accountability?
That's a very good question, and let me just go back to, this is going to be a long way to get to your answer, Joe, but I am the son of two mental health care professionals. My father was a psychologist who taught clinical psychology at San Francisco State for 42 years, and I still bump into his students all over town. And my mother is a therapist who ran the East Oakland Youth and Family Center for many years when I was growing up. They hated Ronald Reagan. And they hated Ronald Reagan because he dismantled the mental health care system of the entire state of California. And we have been now for much of my life been trying to piece that back together. And Prop 1 is an opportunity in that direction, and allows us to actually stand up facilities. It also, by the way, means that we're going to have to figure out how to operate those facilities, because it doesn't come with the operational dollars. But going back to the Mohammed question, the answer is you have to have very clear metrics, you have to have very clear plans, and you can't put your plans on the shelf. This was the policy disagreement that we had earlier this week that I was referring to earlier, which is, in the old days, when I first became a member of the Board of Supervisors, because we have an endless amount of need and a limited amount of resource, that is reality, there was a fight every time a ballot was coming up about what general obligation bond, Dan Hodap, you probably remember this, what general obligation bond we would put on the ballot. Everybody had good stories. The Department of Public Health had lots of deferred maintenance. The Port of San Francisco had deferred maintenance. Everybody had deferred maintenance. And the answer was, whoever was best connected, told the best story, had the most friends, got their bond on the ballot. They all had real needs. And then about 5 years in, we actually decided we would create a law that required us to create a capital plan, that required us to inventory the entire city's backlog, whether it was public health facilities, fire stations, police stations, everything the city owns, and what the priority of refurbishing them, replacing them, or even abandoning them was. And you want to know what? For most of the last 20 years, we've stuck to that plan. And that plan, by the way, says when we're going to go out with bonds in what order. In 2024, March, we're going to have an affordable housing bond. In November, a public health bond. In 2026, a Rec and Park bond. Until last week, when all of a sudden it was the flavor du jour. And my point about this is, you got to create a plan. You gotta stick to the plan. It requires discipline, it requires maturity, and you can't just go grab the next shiny object because it's gonna get you more votes.
So last question here on Friday night is that you have said that you are the candidate who will run a positive campaign. So if we're going to keep it positive, can you think of nice things to say about your four major competitors? Even if you don't feel they should be mayor or continue to be mayor.
So I obviously have a lot of history with two of them because London and I both served together. I've served with 42 members of the Board of Supervisors, including London and Asha. And I have to say, we actually have a cordial relationship, although you never would have known that based on the statements when I got into the race. They compared me to the Terminator, and then I scratched my head and I was like, didn't the Terminator become governor? But
More than that, in that movie that they quoted from, the Terminator was the one saving us from a tech-fueled apocalypse.
I have no comment.
I've since found out that the people who write these things, like I had to actually make a call to the mayor's campaign and say, does he have kids? Because these are dad jokes. And they said, yes, it's okay.
But listen, when London and I work well together, like this tax package that I just told you about, like the work that we did together to streamline the adaptive reuse of office to residential, there's something to show for it. The same is true with Supervisor Safai. And by the way, that was somewhat true with Mark Farrell. Daniel Lurie, I don't know him, but I'm going to get to know these people on the campaign trail. I intend to treat them with dignity and respect. And the voters of San Francisco are very smart, and they're going to make their choices. And I hope that they will use all of their votes on the ballot. I mean, we have ranked choice voting in San Francisco, and I hope, this notion of you should throw away your vote and only vote for one and not for, or only vote for three and not for four, is really throwing away your vote. This is a fundamental underpinning of democracy. It's something that people have literally fought and died for in America. Use all your votes.
You have 10 of them. That's a lot. But you have 10 votes, so you can certainly, the other joke I had, and I am a dad, is that, after it's like my kid's Little League team, after the first 5, the talent drops off a bit, but, everybody gets to bat.
Joe, can I put in one shameless plug?
Sure.
You are all welcome to participate in the campaign. Go to aaron2024.com. I am the only, and I'm not casting aspersions on my fellow candidates, but I am the only major candidate in this race who does not have a billionaire on my side, but I have all of you, and I'm going to need your help.
I don't think our Pennsylvania. What's that? Oh, wow. Okay. While you're at it, please go to missionlocal.org. Please donate us whatever money you can. And please keep reading, and please keep giving us tips and keeping us informed. Thank you for coming out on Friday.